The autumn wind whipped through the dusty streets of Millfield, Colorado Territory, as 12-year-old Samuel "Sam" Porter stood trembling in the center of the town square, surrounded by a mob of angry faces that seemed to blur together in his terror. The boy's clothes were little more than rags, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible beneath the repairs. His thin frame spoke of too many missed meals, and his dark eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned early that the world was not kind to those without protection. "Thief!" shouted Ezra Blackwood, the town's most prosperous merchant, his fat finger pointed accusingly at the small figure. "I saw him with my own eyes, slipping out of my store with my merchandise hidden in his coat." The crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in a chorus of condemnation that seemed to echo off the wooden buildings surrounding the square. Sam felt his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, but he forced himself to stand straight despite the fear coursing through his veins. "I didn't steal anything," Sam protested, his voice cracking with emotion and the strain of trying to be heard over the mob. "I was just looking at the books in the window. I never went inside." "Liar," spat Martha Blackwood, Ezra's wife, her face twisted with disgust as she looked down at the orphan boy. "We all know what your kind are like. No parents, no upbringing, no moral guidance. It's only natural that you turn to stealing to survive." Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grim with the unpleasant duty he faced. He was a fair man by nature, but the evidence seemed clear enough, and public sentiment was running strongly against the boy. "Sam, son, Mr. Blackwood says he saw you take a book from his store. Says you've got it hidden somewhere. If you just admit what you did and return it, maybe we can work something out." "But I didn't take anything," Sam cried, tears beginning to stream down his dirt-stained cheeks. "Please, Sheriff, you have to believe me. I know I'm just an orphan. I know nobody cares what happens to me, but I'm not a thief. I've never stolen anything in my life." The desperation in the boy's voice might have moved a less prejudiced crowd, but the people of Millfield had already made up their minds. To them, Sam represented everything they feared about the growing number of homeless children wandering the frontier, a potential threat to their ordered society that needed to be dealt with swiftly and decisively. "Search him," demanded Frank Caldwell, the bank president, his voice carrying the authority of wealth and position. "If he's innocent, he won't object to proving it." Sheriff Morrison hesitated, uncomfortable with the mob mentality that was taking over what should have been a simple investigation. But before he could act, a new voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. "What exactly is going on here?" The crowd turned as one to see Clayton "Clay" Hawthorne riding slowly into the square on his black stallion. At 65 years old, Clay was one of the most respected men in the territory, a rancher who had built his spread from nothing through 40 years of honest work and fair dealing. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the angry voices of the mob gradually died away to nervous murmurs. Clay dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle, his pale blue eyes taking in the scene with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to read situations quickly and accurately. He was tall and lean, his silver hair visible beneath his worn hat, his weathered hands resting casually on his belt as he surveyed the crowd. "Sheriff Morrison," Clay said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the square despite its low volume. "Would you mind explaining why half the town is gathered around a child who looks scared out of his wits?" "Mr. Hawthorne," the sheriff replied, clearly relieved to have someone of Clay's stature involved in the situation. "Young Sam here has been accused of stealing from Blackwood's store. Mr. Blackwood says he saw the boy take a book." Clay's eyes found Sam in the center of the crowd, taking in the boy's terrified expression and defensive posture. Something in the child's face reminded him powerfully of his own son, who had died of fever 20 years ago at almost the same age. The memory hit him like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral as he approached the boy. "Sam, is it?" Clay asked gently, kneeling down so that he was at the boy's eye level. "I'm Clay Hawthorne. Can you tell me what happened here?" Sam looked up at the tall rancher, seeing something in those kind eyes that he hadn't found in any adult face. "For months, Mr. Hawthorne, I swear on my parents' graves, I didn't steal anything. I was just looking at the books in Mr. Blackwood's window because I can read, and I haven't seen a real book in so long. But I never went inside. I know I don't have money to buy anything, so I just looked from outside." "He's lying," Ezra Blackwood interrupted angrily. "I saw him clear as day, sneaking out the back door of my store with something hidden under his coat." Clay stood slowly, his expression thoughtful as he considered the merchant's accusation. "Ezra, you say you saw the boy leaving your store. What time was this?" "About an hour ago, maybe a little more," Blackwood replied confidently. "I was in the back room doing inventory when I heard someone moving around in the front. When I came out to look, I saw this little thief slipping out the back door." "And you're certain it was Sam?" "Of course I'm certain. Who else could it have been?" Clay nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to Sam. "Son, where were you an hour ago?" "I was down by Miller's Creek," Sam replied eagerly, sensing that this man might actually listen to him. "I go there sometimes to catch fish for dinner. I caught 2 small trout, and I was cleaning them when I heard all the shouting from town." "That's convenient," Martha Blackwood sneered. "No witnesses, I suppose?" "Actually," Clay said quietly, "there might be. I was riding along Miller's Creek about an hour ago, checking on some strays that wandered off from my herd. I remember seeing a small figure by the water, fishing with a makeshift pole." The crowd fell silent, suddenly uncertain. Clay Hawthorne's word carried enormous weight in Millfield, and if he was vouching for the boy's whereabouts, it threw the entire accusation into question. "But I saw someone leaving my store," Blackwood protested, his confidence beginning to waver. "I'm sure you did," Clay agreed. "The question is whether that someone was Sam." Clay walked over to where Sam stood and placed a gentle hand on the boy's thin shoulder. "Sheriff Morrison, I'd like to suggest we take a closer look at Mr. Blackwood's store before we brand this child a thief. Sometimes the truth isn't as obvious as it first appears." Sheriff Morrison nodded gratefully, recognizing the wisdom in Clay's suggestion. "That sounds reasonable. Ezra, would you mind showing us exactly what was taken and where you saw the intruder?" As the crowd began to move toward Blackwood's store, Clay remained behind with Sam, who was still shaking from the ordeal of being accused and threatened by half the town. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," Sam whispered, his voice thick with gratitude and relief. "Nobody's ever stood up for me before, not since my parents died." Clay felt his heart twist with pain at the boy's words. Here was a child who had clearly been failed by every adult in his life, left to fend for himself in a world that seemed determined to destroy him before he had a chance to grow up. "Sam," Clay said quietly, "no matter what we find in that store, I want you to know something. You're not alone anymore. I don't know what your story is, but I can see that you're a good boy who's been dealt a hard hand. That's going to change, starting today." Sam looked up at the rancher with eyes that held a desperate hope he was afraid to trust. "Do you really mean that, sir?" "Son," Clay replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "I've never made a promise I didn't keep. You stick close to me, and we'll see this through together." As they walked toward Blackwood's store to investigate the alleged theft, neither Clay nor Sam could have imagined how this day would change both their lives forever. The boy, who had been branded a thief by an angry mob, was about to discover that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest new beginnings. The interior of Blackwood's general store was cramped and cluttered, with merchandise stacked on every available surface and hanging from hooks on the walls. The smell of leather, tobacco, and various spices created a distinctive aroma that spoke of commerce and prosperity. Clay Hawthorne moved through the narrow aisles with careful attention to detail, his experienced eyes taking in everything while Sheriff Morrison and the gathered townspeople watched with growing unease. Sam remained close to Clay's side, still trembling from his ordeal in the town square, but drawing strength from the rancher's calm presence. The boy had lived on the streets long enough to recognize genuine kindness when he encountered it, and Clay Hawthorne radiated the kind of solid dependability that Sam had learned to trust. "Now, Ezra," Sheriff Morrison said as they reached the back of the store, "show us exactly where you were when you heard the intruder and which direction they went when they left." Ezra Blackwood pointed toward a small storage room behind the main counter. "I was back there doing inventory on them. Winter supplies. I heard footsteps and some rustling sounds, like someone was moving around the books and papers near the front window. When I came out to investigate, I saw a small figure slipping out the back door." Clay examined the back door carefully, noting that it opened onto an alley that ran behind the row of buildings. "This door was unlocked?" "Well, yes," Blackwood admitted reluctantly. "I usually keep it unlocked during business hours for deliveries and such." "And you're certain the person you saw was Sam?" Blackwood's confidence seemed to waver slightly under Clay's steady gaze. It was a small person, about his size. Who else could it have been? Clay turned his attention to the front of the store, where a display of books sat in the window that faced the main street. The volumes were arranged carefully to catch the light and attract customers, including several leather-bound classics that would have been treasures to a boy who loved to read but had no money to spend. "Sam," Clay said gently, "you mentioned you were looking at the books in the window. Which ones caught your attention?" Sam approached the display cautiously, still nervous about being in the store where he had been accused of stealing. "That one there," he said, pointing to a copy of Robinson Crusoe, "and that collection of Shakespeare's plays. I learned to read from books like those before my parents died." Clay noticed something that made him pause. The books Sam had indicated were clearly visible from outside the store, but they were also positioned in such a way that someone inside would have difficulty seeing them from the back room where Blackwood claimed to have been working. "Ezra," Clay said thoughtfully, "from where you were standing in the storage room, would you have been able to see these particular books?" "Well, that is," Blackwood stammered, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of Clay's questions. Sheriff Morrison, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, stepped forward to examine the sightlines himself. "Actually, Ezra, I don't think you could see the front window display from back there at all. The shelving units are in the way." Before Blackwood could respond, Clay noticed something else that made him frown. On the floor near the back door, partially hidden beneath a stack of newspapers, was a small, leather-bound journal. He picked it up and examined it carefully, noting that it appeared to be new and expensive. "Ezra," Clay said quietly, "is this one of your items?" Blackwood's face went pale as he recognized the journal. That's the book that was stolen! How did you find it?" "It was right here by the back door," Clay replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, almost as if someone had dropped it while making a hasty exit. The implications were becoming clear to everyone present. If Sam had stolen the journal and hidden it, it would have been found on his person or in some hiding place, not lying abandoned in the store where the alleged theft had taken place. "Maybe he dropped it when he heard you coming," suggested Martha. Blackwood desperately, but her voice lacked conviction. Clay shook his head slowly. "Sam, where did you say you were fishing?" "Down by Miller's Creek, sir, at the bend where the old willow tree hangs over the water." "Sheriff Morrison," Clay said, "that's nearly a mile from here." If Sam had stolen this journal an hour ago, he would have had plenty of time to hide it properly or take it with him. Why would he drop it here and then run all the way to the creek? The sheriff was beginning to understand Clay's reasoning. "You're suggesting that maybe Ezra was mistaken about who he saw." "I'm suggesting," Clay said carefully, "that maybe we should ask young Tommy Blackwood where he was an hour ago." A collective gasp went up from the crowd as Clay's words sank in. Tommy Blackwood, Ezra's 14-year-old son, was known around town for his mischievous behavior and his tendency to take things that didn't belong to him. But he was also the son of one of Millfield's most prosperous citizens, and the idea that he might be the real thief was almost unthinkable to most of the townspeople. "How dare you!" Ezra Blackwood sputtered, his face turning red with indignation. "My son is a good boy. He would never steal from his own father's store." "Then, where is he?" Clay asked mildly. "I notice he's not here with the rest of the family." Martha Blackwood looked around nervously, as if just realizing that her son was indeed absent from the crowd that had gathered to condemn Sam. He's probably at home, doing his schoolwork." In the middle of the afternoon, Sheriff Morrison asked, his own suspicions now aroused. "When there's all this excitement in town," before anyone could answer, the sound of running footsteps echoed from the alley behind the store. A moment later, Tommy Blackwood burst through the back door, his face flushed and his breathing labored as if he had been running hard. "Pa!" he gasped, then stopped short as he realized the store was full of people all staring at him. "What's everyone doing here?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy's eyes darted around the room, taking in the hostile faces of the crowd, the leather journal in Clay's hands, and the small, terrified figure of Sam Porter standing beside the tall rancher. "Tommy," Sheriff Morrison said quietly, "we need to ask you some questions about what happened here an hour ago." The boy's face went even redder, and he looked desperately at his father for support. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been at home all afternoon." "Then how did you know to come here?" Clay asked gently. "How did you know there was trouble at your father's store?" Tommy's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find an answer. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and the truth came tumbling out. "I didn't mean to cause trouble for anyone," he said miserably. "I just wanted to borrow the journal to copy some of the poetry for a girl at school. I thought I could take it for a few hours and bring it back before anyone noticed." The confession hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Here was the son of one of their most respected citizens admitting to the very crime they had been ready to condemn an innocent orphan for committing. "When I heard Pa coming," Tommy continued, "I panicked and ran out the back door. I dropped the book, but I was too scared to go back for it. Then I heard all the shouting about the orphan boy, and I was too much of a coward to speak up." Ezra Blackwood looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face went through a series of expressions, from shock to embarrassment to a deep, burning shame. He had been ready to see an innocent child branded as a thief and possibly sent to reform school, all to protect his own family's reputation. "My God," he whispered, staring at Sam with horror at what he had almost done. "What have I done?" Clay placed a protective hand on Sam's shoulder as the boy looked around at the faces that had been so hostile just minutes before. "What you've done, Ezra, is learned an important lesson about jumping to conclusions. The question now is what you're going to do to make this right. Subscribe to help us keep bringing you these incredible stories of justice and redemption from the frontier." 3 months after the incident that had nearly destroyed Sam Porter's reputation and future, the boy sat on the front porch of Clay Hawthorne's ranch house, carefully reading aloud from a well-worn copy of Treasure Island. His voice was stronger, now, no longer carrying the fearful tremor that had marked his speech during those terrible days when the whole town had believed him to be a thief. The transformation in Sam had been remarkable to witness. Gone was the skeletal, frightened waif who had trembled in the town square under the accusations of angry citizens. In his place sat a healthy, confident young man whose eyes sparkled with intelligence and whose face had filled out under the care of regular meals and genuine affection. Clay listened from his rocking chair, whittling a small wooden horse as Sam's clear voice brought the adventures of Jim Hawkins to life in the gathering twilight. The old rancher had discovered that the boy had an extraordinary gift for reading and learning, a hunger for knowledge that had been starved during his months of struggling to survive on the streets. "That's enough for tonight, son," Clay said, gently as Sam reached the end of a chapter. "Your eyes will strain trying to read in this light." Sam closed the book carefully and set it aside, treating it with the reverence of someone who understood the true value of learning. "Clay, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you stand up for me that day? You didn't know me, didn't know whether I was guilty or innocent. Why did you risk your reputation to help a street orphan?" Clay set down his whittling and looked out across the prairie, where the last light of sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was a question Sam had asked before, in different ways, as if he still couldn't quite believe that someone had cared enough to save him from the mob's judgment. "Sam," Clay said quietly, 40 years ago, when I was not much older than you are now, I was falsely accused of stealing horses from a ranch where I worked. The owner's son had actually taken them to sell for gambling money, but it was easier to blame the hired hand with no family and no connections. Sam turned to look at the rancher with new understanding. "What happened?" "I was fired, blacklisted, branded as a thief just like they tried to do to you. For 2 years, I couldn't find honest work anywhere because word had spread about my supposed crime. I nearly starved, nearly gave up on ever having a decent life." Clay's voice carried the weight of old pain, but also the wisdom that came from surviving injustice and building something better from the ashes. "Finally, an old rancher named Daniel Morrison took a chance on me. He said he judged men by their character, not by their reputation. He gave me work, taught me the business, and eventually left me this ranch when he died. Is that why you helped me? Because someone helped you?" "Partly," Clay admitted, "but mostly because I looked into your eyes that day and saw something I recognized. I saw a good boy who was being destroyed by circumstances beyond his control, and I remembered what that felt like." Sam was quiet for a moment, absorbing this revelation about his benefactor's past. "What happened to the real thief? The rancher's son?" Clay's expression hardened slightly. "He eventually got caught stealing from someone he couldn't charm his way out of trouble with. Lost everything, including his father's respect, but by then the damage to innocent people had been done. Like what almost happened to me. Exactly like what almost happened to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about justice, redemption, and the power of one person's willingness to stand up for what was right. "Clay," Sam said eventually, "I've been thinking about something else, about what I want to do when I grow up." "What's that, son?" "I want to be a lawyer. I want to help people who are falsely accused, who don't have anyone to speak for them. I want to make sure that what happened to both of us doesn't happen to other innocent people." Clay smiled, feeling a deep pride in the boy he had come to love as his own son. "That's a fine ambition, Sam. You've certainly got the intelligence for it, and more importantly, you've got the heart for justice. Would you help me? I know it means years of schooling, probably going back east to study law. I know it would cost money and—" "Sam," Clay interrupted gently, "you're my son now, in every way that matters. Of course I'll help you achieve your dreams. In fact, I've already been corresponding with a preparatory school in Denver that could get you ready for law school." Sam's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and joy. The boy who had been branded a thief at 12, who had faced the very real possibility of being sent to reform school for a crime he didn't commit, was now being offered the chance to become an advocate for justice. "There's something else," Clay continued, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out an official-looking document. "This came in today's mail from the territorial government." Sam took the paper with trembling hands. and read it carefully. It was an official declaration of adoption, making Samuel Porter legally and permanently Samuel Hawthorne, son of Clayton Hawthorne, with all the rights and privileges thereof. "You mean it's official?" Sam whispered. "I'm really your son?" "You've been my son since the day I first stood up for you in that town square," Clay replied, his voice thick with emotion. "This just makes it legal." As the stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, father and son sat together on the porch of their home, both understanding that they had found in each other exactly what they had been looking for without even knowing it. Clay had found an heir and a purpose for his remaining years, while Sam had found not just a father, but a man who believed in his potential and was willing to invest in his future. Dad, Sam said, testing out the word that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. "There's one more thing I want to do." "What's that?" "I want to go back to Millfield and publicly forgive the Blackwoods. I want people to see that holding grudges only perpetuates the cycle of hurt and injustice." Clay looked at his son with amazement and deep respect. Here was a boy who had every right to be bitter and vengeful, choosing instead to be gracious and forgiving. "Are you sure about that, son? You don't owe them anything." "I'm not doing it for them," Sam replied with wisdom beyond his years. "I'm doing it for me, and for everyone else who might be falsely accused in the future. I want to show people that mercy and forgiveness are stronger than anger and revenge." Clay nodded slowly, understanding that his son was already becoming the kind of man who could change the world through quiet acts of courage and compassion. "Then we'll go to Millfield next week, and you can say whatever you feel needs to be said." As they prepared to go inside for the night, Sam paused at the door and looked back at his father. "Dad, do you think the brand they tried to put on me is really gone? Do you think people will ever see me as anything other than the boy who was accused of stealing?" Clay put his arm around his son's shoulders and smiled. "Son, the only brand that matters is the one you put on yourself through your actions and character. You've proven yourself to be honest, intelligent, and forgiving. That's the reputation you'll carry for the rest of your life. And if someone tries to brand an innocent person again, then you'll stand up for them, just like someone once stood up for you. That's how we break the cycle, Sam. That's how we make the world a little bit better." As they walked into the warm, lamplit house that had become Sam's sanctuary and launching pad for his future, both father and son understood that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst moments. The day Sam had been branded, a thief had led directly to his adoption by a man who would give him everything he needed to succeed in life. And somewhere in Millfield, Ezra Blackwood continued to live with the shame of what he had almost done to an innocent child, a daily reminder that rushed judgments and prejudice could destroy lives. His own son, Tommy, had learned from his father's mistake and grown into a young man who always gave others the benefit of the doubt. The ripples of that day in the town square would continue to spread for years to come, touching lives and changing hearts throughout the territory. Because sometimes, when one person has the courage to stand up for justice, it creates a wave of positive change that extends far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Please subscribe to help us continue sharing these stories that remind us of the power of standing up for the innocent and believing in second chances.